Welcome to this webinar on building research data infrastructure in libraries, the impacts of culture and values. This is one of the events in the Research Data Management Week organized by the Chinese University of Hong Kong CUHK Library. And I'm Wendy, Research Data Librarian from the Chinese University of Hong Kong Library. Today, we are happy to have invited Professor Peter Dutch from University of Illinois Urbana-Champaign to share with us this topic. We are also glad to have not only staff and students from CUHK, but also colleagues from other institutions in Hong Kong to join this session. Please note that this session will be recorded and may be shared on the CUHK YouTube channel in the future. If you have any questions or comments, please type in the chat box of the Zoom or else with the mic after the session, after Professor Dutch's talk. And we will start the recording now. And now, may I invite Ms. Lily Ko, Head of Research and Learning Support at CUHK, to introduce Professor Dutch. Lily, please.
Good morning and good evening, everybody. We are very honored to invite Professor Peter Dutch to deliver and talk about this talk this morning and this evening. Professor Peter Dutch is the Associate Professor in the School of Information Sciences at the University of Illinois Urbana-Champaign. Prior to joining the I School of Illinois, Professor Dutch worked as a postdoctoral researcher in the UCLA Department of Information Studies and Center for Knowledge Infrastructures, studying the building, running, and effects of information infrastructures that support scientific collaboration. His dissertation for the doctorate in computer science from the University of Oxford addressed how scientists and software engineers in online citizen science projects manage members of the public to process and generate large data sets. He's particularly interested in the changes in the organization, conduct, and ethics of scientific research that result from the interactions of technologies for processing scientific data with broader social factors. To study these changes, he conducts longitudinal and ethnographic studies of large multidisciplinary science projects to examine relationships between contexts in which these collaborations are embedded information infrastructures and scientists' day-to-day data practice. His work has been published across a range of venues, including the Journal of the Society of Information Science and Technology, International Journal on Digital Libraries, and Philosophical Transactions of the Royal Society. Without further ado, let us welcome Professor Peter Dutch. Thank you, Professor Dutch.
Okay, well, thank you very much for that kind introduction. It's a real honor to be here. I'm very pleased. Yeah, good morning or good evening. It's evening here. It's about 8:30 in the evening. So today I'm going to be presenting some research that I've conducted with colleagues from the University of Illinois and UCLA, the University of California, Los Angeles, in particular focusing on library infrastructure and the challenges of building library infrastructure for research data curation. And in particular, you know, I think in recent years, certainly there have been an increasing number of mandates or policies from national funding agencies, such as the Chinese Academies of Science. So, you know, since 1984, the Committee on Data for Science and Technology, China has been part of that since 1984. And in more recent years, the Chinese Academy of Sciences has implemented policies that require researchers to share or deposit their data, their research data sets, with prior to or along with publication of their research. And this is a common trend across much of the world. So Japan, similarly, the US, so where I'm working at the moment, the National Science Foundation and the National Institutes of Health have had research policies. These are organizations that fund scientific research at a national level. And they've had their data management policies in place for over a decade, 15 years now in the case of the National Science Foundation. The European Union and the Research Councils of the UK, which is where I come from originally, they also have their policies, the Australian Research Council, the Wellcome Trust. So it's not just national government or public funding agencies, but also private foundations such as the Wellcome Trust, which is a major funder of medical research in the UK. The Sloan Foundation, which has funded a lot of my research over the last 10 years as well, also has these policies that require researchers who receive funding to come up with a plan to archive and curate data over the long term, and to make that data available to others for many different reasons. And there are many different reasons to share data sets. So beyond the person or beyond the team that first collected the data, one major reason to share research data is to enhance research integrity, to make research more reproducible, and even when research can't be reproduced, to at least enhance transparency, so that people can see, other people can see the data that research results are based on. And that's very important for fostering trust in research results, including public trust in the results of research. So, for instance, around the recent coronavirus pandemic, there was a lot of debate around what measures should be implemented. For instance, public health measures or measures around vaccines, and being able to share the data that underlies those measures, I think, is very important for fostering public trust and public compliance. As well, another major reason for sharing data sets is to facilitate new science. So it's very good for being able to ask new questions of existing data sets, and as well as being able to integrate one data set with other data sets to be able to answer new questions. Data sets can often be very expensive to produce, so this can be a cost-saving measure, and often as well for many types of data sets, particularly data sets that are observational, that are about a particular place or a particular location at a particular point in time. These data sets, if they're lost, they can never be reproduced, so they're very, very valuable. One type, for example, are astronomy data sets, and I'll be talking more about those types of data sets in a minute. Of course, it's not just a question of actually sharing the data sets, but it's also a challenge of being able to share the data sets in a form that other people who might reuse the data sets can actually reuse those data sets, that they can actually find those data sets, that they can actually access those data sets, and that they can actually interpret those data sets, understand those data sets, judge whether those data sets are of good enough quality, so that they can understand whether they want to reuse those data sets. And of course, there are many different groups of people who might reuse a data set. Of course, there's the researcher who produced the data in the first place, or other members of their research team, other researchers who are in the same discipline, researchers who are in other disciplines as well, and others as well outside the academy, such as policymakers. And the further away you get from the original source of the data set, the more difficult it becomes to have effective sharing and to have effective reuse of data. Somebody who's outside of the original discipline, for instance, the same discipline may struggle to understand the methods that we use to create the data. They may struggle to judge the quality of the data, of the underlying data set. And so the actual task of being able to share data is very, very difficult. I said that collecting data in the first place is very expensive, but actually having effective sharing and reuse of data sets is also very, very difficult. It's very resource intensive. It requires a lot of different infrastructure, technical infrastructure, for instance, to store the data, and also to things like databases, but also human infrastructure, skills, people, work practices, curation practices, and they're also very expensive and they require funding as well. Of course, this requires funding. So the people that, these funding policies that I mentioned early on that require researchers to manage and share their data sets, they often don't really come with any additional funding for those researchers. And the researchers that produce the data sets, they may run out of money very soon. Very often the projects that they are funded, in which they produce the data sets, are fixed term, maybe 3 years or 5 years. But after that, the money may run out. And so in turn, the funding may run out for the technology, the people, the expertise, the skills, the practices to actually make that data, essentially keep that data alive. And so what happens when the data, when the project funding runs out? What happens for the researchers who produce the data sets? How can they actually comply with the policies, the requirements of funding agencies? Increasingly, there are databases available, but these databases may be very discipline specific. They may only cover certain types of data sets and not other types of data sets. As a result, there is an increasing role for research libraries based at universities, to themselves build infrastructure to support the curation of data sets. Across many different countries, including Europe, the United States, and of course in China, more and more universities are building research data services. Some services are support services, providing advice and help for researchers, but other types of services being provided by libraries involve building digital infrastructure. So, for instance, data repositories, where researchers based at those universities can deposit their data sets for long-term curation and access. And this is really what I'll be talking more about in the rest of the talk, and looking at the challenges of doing that, and in particular, looking at some of the challenges faced by 2 universities in the United States when they tried to build this type of infrastructure. The task facing libraries is very difficult. Perhaps researchers go to libraries and ask for this type of infrastructure. But it's also then, in turn, libraries face a challenging task of building the infrastructure. Libraries often don't really start from scratch. They're not building this digital curation infrastructure from the ground up, from nothing. Instead, libraries themselves, they have existing staff and expertise. They have existing practices and approaches to curation and providing services for users. And they have existing technical facilities as well. And very often libraries are adapting these different components of their existing infrastructure. And that's one challenge. How can libraries actually build on their existing infrastructure? And as well, and this is something that is very much the case in the United States, that although many libraries have built data repositories, that there's still not a huge amount of uptake from researchers. The potential of this library infrastructure has not been fully realized. And so that begs the question of how do we actually fully realize the potential of libraries for research data curation? What I'm going to talk about now is work from a project that I was involved with, or that I've been involved with for about 9 years. It was recently finished. So I work with a couple of students at the University of Illinois, and we partnered with a team at the UCLA Department of Information Studies. The team at the Department of Information Studies in UCLA was led by Christine Borgman, and the research has been funded by the Alfred Sloan Foundation, which is a private funding foundation in the United States. We've had two big multi-year grants from the Sloan Foundation, and our project's been called the Knowledge Infrastructures Project. And we are a team of social scientists. So what we do is we go off and we are interested in studying teams of people and understanding how they work together and the challenges that they face in working together, for instance, to build infrastructure for research data. And so these were the three questions that our project focused on overall. Across a number of different projects, we had a number of different case studies. One is looking at the different infrastructures, divisions of labor, knowledge and expertise required for data-intensive science. How are the infrastructures of multidisciplinary, data-intensive scientific endeavors established, and how are they dismantled? And how do data management, curation, sharing, and reuse practices vary among research areas? Because, of course, different scientific disciplines have very different needs. And as we'll see with libraries, you may have one library, but it's serving many different scientific disciplines with many different needs. So this is the team. So a number of these, they've all moved on to other jobs. So Ashley Sands, for instance, is now a Senior Program Director at the Institute for Museum and Library Services in Washington, D.C., which is a big funding agency in the United States that actually funds a lot of research in library and information science. Irena Pasquetto is now a faculty member at the University of Maryland. Morgan Wofford is a PhD student at the University of Michigan. Bernie Randalls is now at the University of Southern Oregon, and Milena Goshen works as a curator at the Getty Institute. But this was the team. And we were really interested in, as I said, the infrastructures that are required for to support data curation in many different stages of data curation, the full stages of data curation. As I mentioned, we are social scientists, and what we were very interested in looking at is how complex the infrastructures are for data curation. I'm not going to go into all of these different components in this picture. This picture, I really like this picture. So I've got the link in the presentation, which you might want to go and check out. And it's the front cover of a report from about 12 years ago on knowledge infrastructures. And it really just emphasizes how many different components there are. Perhaps if you look on the right-hand side, you've got the person who's the user of the infrastructure. Perhaps they just look at the interface. Perhaps they're accessing a data set. But underlying, them going along to the database, doing a search, and then retrieving the data set of interest to them, underlying that is a whole host of technical infrastructure, very complicated technical systems. You've also got, library systems, methods of knowledge organization, and you've also got skilled professionals as well. And these different components fit together. Not only are they complicated, but they fit together in very complicated ways. And they require a lot of ongoing maintenance. Keeping this infrastructure going is very resource intensive. So our research methods for the knowledge infrastructures team were very much qualitative social science. They involved observation or ethnography, which involved members of the team going to watch people at work, watching scientists at work, watching librarians at work, watching data curators at work, maybe spending many weeks or even months at a time in the offices and laboratories of these people to understand how they actually accomplish the work. We also conducted a lot of in-depth interviews, looking at different, many hundreds of interviews across our different research sites. Interviews maybe taking, between an hour and in some cases even up to 3 hours. And also document analysis as well, looking at the different policies, scientific publications, reports, all kinds of different documents as well that help the people that we were studying do their work. I'm not going to go into too much detail about the different research sites, but we compared a lot of different scientific disciplines. So astronomy sky surveys, which I'll be focusing on. So focusing in particular on astronomy, the deep subsea floor biosphere, which was something that I led the case study on for several years as well, which scientists looking at microbial life under the seafloor, biomedical collaboration, computational science, and other types of astronomers as well beyond sky surveys. But what I want to do really is now present in more detail our case study of one astronomy sky survey, and in particular, how this astronomy sky survey dealt with long-term data curation and how they involved research libraries in the US. So in astronomy sky survey, there are many different types of astronomy sky surveys now. These are big, large projects funded, with funding on the scale of hundreds of millions of dollars, or even more than $1 billion. A very famous recent example of astronomy sky surveys is the James Webb Space Telescope, which was in the news, very recently when it launched. The Hubble Space Telescope is another famous example. They're both telescopes out in space, but this particular sky survey was based on a telescope on land, a ground-based telescope based in New Mexico, and it was built in the 1990s, and then from 2000 to 2008, it had its first 2 phases of data collection, which involved taking lots and lots of photos of the sky, trying to cover as much of the sky as possible. And then the Sloan, so phases 1 and 2 completed in 2008, but the survey is still going to this day. And in particular, I want to focus on stages 1 and 2 and the data from those stages, because this project was actually very, very groundbreaking. It was the first major sky survey in ground-based sky survey in this particular field of astronomy. And the data of from the first 2 phases covered 160 terabytes of data. Also, they made the data openly available. Again, this was very new, very novel for this particular, for astronomy. And the data itself was used, has supported more than 8,000 scientific publications. So the Sloan Digital Sky Survey data has been made available in annual data releases to astronomers. Astronomers then use that data and have then been able to publish a lot of different types of papers on the basis of that. Now, as 2008, as the end of Sloan SDSS 1 and 2 approached, the project didn't really know what was going to happen beyond 2008. They thought their funding might run out. They thought that the people that worked for the project would leave, and so they would lose the money to keep their data set available, and that they would also lose the expertise needed to make their data set available. But nevertheless, they felt very strongly that the data had a lot of value, and it would have a lot of future value. Firstly, to produce new astronomy knowledge, and also to enable reproducibility of all the 8,000 plus papers that have been published using this data set. But also as well, they wanted to foster the openness within astronomy. Like I said, this was very new for astronomy at the time, but the people that ran the Sloan Digital Sky Survey wanted astronomy to become more open in terms of its data. And as well, the Sloan Digital Sky Survey data has been very useful for testing and planning new sky surveys in the future. So there was a huge amount of potential value for this data beyond 2008, but there was no plan for what was going to happen beyond 2008. So what happened is that the leaders of the Sloan Digital Sky Survey approached 2 university libraries in the United States. For reasons of privacy, we're calling them Blue University Library and Red University Library. That's not their real names, but when we did the research with these libraries, we said that we would keep them anonymous. So SDSS leaders approached these 2 libraries and went through 2 phases. So between 2006 and 2008, the Sloan Digital Sky Survey leaders met with the library leaders to agree these memoranda of understanding. So these were agreements, documents that set out exactly what was going to happen, what the data transfer process would involve. And then between 2008 and 2013, the libraries then worked on building digital data curation infrastructure in order to curate the Sloan Digital Sky Survey data. And during this phase between 2008 and 2013, the Sloan Digital Sky Survey didn't really engage much with the 2 university libraries. The 2 university libraries had a lot of freedom to actually carry out the data transfer process in the way that they wanted to. As I said already, the Sloan Digital Sky Survey stakeholders' objectives, they wanted to make the data set available long term, well beyond 2008, to astronomers, to produce new science and to reproduce existing science. The university libraries, on the other hand, they were facing a lot of pressure. So, at that time, they were facing spending cuts. They were also facing, they were less visible within the university because due to, for instance, many library services moving online, such as journals moving online, it meant that researchers weren't going to the library's physical buildings anymore. And so the libraries were worried that people at their universities wouldn't see them as useful. So they were worried about their long-term future. And so they felt under pressure to provide new services to researchers at their universities. And they saw that actually building research data set curation infrastructure, building databases, data repositories was potential for them to really secure their future. And they saw the Sloan Digital Sky Survey data transfer as an opportunity to build that infrastructure, as an opportunity to learn how to curate data, and as also as an opportunity to build the technical infrastructure necessary. So the work I'm going to be talking about, a lot of the actual interviews and observation of the libraries was carried out by Ashley Sands, Dr. Ashley Sands, for her dissertation, which was about different topics. And then what I did was I reanalyzed that data and focused, and that's the basis of what I'm going to be talking about now, moving forward. In total, there were interviews with 39 different people at the Sloan Digital Sky Survey. at Red Library and at Blue Library. What I want to talk about in particular are two comparisons. So one is between the two libraries. Although on the surface, the two libraries seemed to have the same task, right, an identical task, that they both had to curate the same data set and make it available, that actually what happened is that they really diverged. They ended up taking very different paths. And as a result, they ended up curating different sets of materials. Each library also implemented different services to support access and use of the data sets. And as a result, the reuse possibilities of the data sets curated by each library were different. And then the other comparison I want to sort of talk about as well, if there's time, is between the libraries on the one hand and the Sloan Digital Sky Survey leaders on the other. The library staff and the library leadership, when they were reflecting on the transfer, you know, in 2015, when they looked back on the transfer, they considered the transfer to be a success. Whereas the Sloan Digital Sky Survey leaders were actually quite disappointed with the outcomes. Well, they had more mixed perspectives on the outcomes. And so I think it's interesting to look at these two different sets of comparisons and see what lessons can be learned for building curation services for researchers. So I'm going to focus in particular first on the first comparison. So Red University Library and Blue University Library. As I mentioned already, they diverged in the paths they took concerning their decisions about, you know, what materials to curate, what services to implement for data access. Actually, you know, because we're social scientists, we were able to identify that the reasons they diverged occurred due to multiple factors. One was the existing infrastructure and the existing people at each library. And that includes the culture and values that were embedded in the infrastructures at each library. So each library was very different in terms of its internal culture, in terms of its mission, and in terms of its values that it brought to the process. And as a result, and as well, each library was very different in terms of the technical resources that it had, and in terms of the skills that the staff at each library had as well. So in particular, our research question, these are the research questions. I'm not going to go into detail for this due to reasons of time, but this is the paper actually that we report our findings in, if you want to look further. In particular as well, I mentioned that each library ended up handling different materials and different services. So the cross in the box on this table indicates which materials they included, but also as well in their curation activities, but also as well support services that they included. And then the dash means that they didn't. And as you can see, each library had very different outcomes to the process. In total, I'm not going to go into too much detail about each of these different components. If you want more details, you can read the article. But I do want to sort of highlight a couple of points. So one is the data archive server. So this is a complete set of all the processed data from the telescope in a flat file format. And the catalog archive server, in contrast, is a collection of the data that was released to the public in a searchable and accessible version. So a version of the data suitable for a database. I also want to highlight the administrative archive, which was basically all the papers and emails internal communications that were created within the Sloan Digital Sky Survey. The help desk, that was a service that was implemented to answer queries from potential users of the Sloan Digital Sky Survey dataset. And then as well, the raw data and software. So this was the data that, as they came off the Sloan Digital Sky Survey telescope, and the software used to process the raw data. And as you can see, the different libraries chose very different collection to curate and different services to implement. And in particular, I'm just going to focus on two activities. So I'm going to focus on how and why Blue University Library implemented the administrative archive, and how and why Red University Library chose to implement and also prioritize the data archive server. So Blue University Library. Blue University Library was a traditional university library. It was part of a university. It had been in existence for about 150 years. It was very concerned with visibility on campus. I should also emphasize, it became involved in the data transfer process, partly because it had this service orientation. It very much believed that its role was to serve its university community. In particular, a number of faculty members at Blue University had been part of the Sloan Digital Sky Survey. And so Blue University felt that as a service to its faculty members, then it should really take on the task of curating the Sloan Digital Sky Survey dataset. And as well, as I said, they wanted to become more visible to their university community. When Blue University started working with the Sloan Digital Sky Survey, the Sloan Digital Sky Survey really didn't want to include the administrative archive in the materials that were going to be curated. It didn't consider them relevant to the data set. It was actually Blue University Library that suggested archiving the administrative archive. Blue and Sloan Digital Sky Survey leaders were very surprised. The reason is that the library believed, firstly, that they wanted to archive the papers of their faculty. So the administrative archive included the emails and the papers, the documents created by their own faculty members in planning the Sloan Digital Sky Survey. But also as well, the library wanted, they believed that the administrative archive would help prospective users of the Sloan Digital Sky Survey dataset actually be able to understand the dataset, that they would be able to understand why different decisions were made that actually affected how the dataset was created. As a result of curating the administrative archive, actually people like historians and sociologists are now able to come along as well and study the Sloan Digital Sky Survey as a major project within astronomy. So there were multiple reasons and multiple factors that actually drove Blue University Library's inclusion of the administrative archive. One is the strategic objective, was the university's strategic objective for getting involved in the data transfer itself. The Blue University Library was noted for having a special collections unit and having particular history of science expertise. And so by bringing this special collections unit and bringing its history of science expertise to bear on archiving the administrative archive, Blue University Library really felt that it would help them to make the case that they were really relevant to their university community, that what they had already, their existing infrastructure, was really relevant and useful for their university community. Also as well, the mission, values and internal culture of Blue University Library drove their curation of the administrative archive. So, they very much had a service culture. They very much had a mission to serve people. And as a result, they really believed that they wanted to help users of the Sloan Digital Sky Survey dataset to actually be able to understand how the dataset was created. And they felt that the administrative archive would help them help the users. And as well, they also had the mission of serving their university community by archiving university records, preserving faculty papers. And as a result, they felt that they should therefore archive and preserve the administrative archive to help preserve faculty who'd been involved in the Sloan Digital Sky Survey. Also as well, the administrative archive fit into Blue University Library's existing organizational structure. So Blue University Library was very traditional. It had a very rigid hierarchy, very top-down hierarchy. And the library leaders felt that they could actually fit the administrative archive curation work easily into their special collections unit already. So they could take on the work of curating the administrative archive without disrupting their existing hierarchy, without disrupting their existing structure. As well, Blue University Library had existing infrastructure and expertise in special collections and history of science that meant that they could easily curate the administrative archive. So these four factors, their strategic objectives for getting involved in the Sloan Digital Sky Survey data transfer, the library's mission, values and internal culture, the library's organizational structure, and the library's existing infrastructure and capacity. All of these four factors intersected to mean that, firstly, it was easy for them to take on the administrative archive, but also that it motivated them to take on the administrative archive. Moving on to the Red University. So I mentioned that the Red University Library, they took on the task of handling the data archive server, which, as I mentioned, was the collection of data from the telescope in a flat file format. But Red University Library had a very contrasting approach to the data transfer compared to Blue University Library. So Red University Library, the transfer at Red University Library was handled by a unit that had a lot of freedom to do its own thing within the library. We're calling it the Institute for Innovation in Digital Curation, or IIDC. That's a made-up name, but that's what we're calling it. The IIDC relies a lot on to support itself. It relies on money from research projects, and as a result, it has this research and development orientation. So its primary aim, or its driver, is to develop cutting-edge data curation solutions. And they were also involved not only in the Sloan Digital Sky Survey project, but they were also involved in this guardianship of data project as well. Again, that's a made-up name, but it's a major project that's about building curation infrastructure for research data sets. And so, the IIDC had a very distinct culture from a more traditional library, a more traditional research library. The IIDC had a very strong art, research and development culture. And as a result, it also had a very kind of agile culture of software development. Agile methods are much more flexible than traditional approaches to software development. And so they're very well suited to research and development environments. And as a result, the IIDC team was very self-managing. It meant that they were able to set their own priorities within the library. They didn't really take orders from higher up in the library. They were able to make their own choices, and they were able to determine their own priorities. Initially, the Sloan Digital Sky Survey didn't want Red University Library to curate the data archive server. It was actually only the IIDC themselves during the initial negotiation phase of the data transfer process. It was the it was IIDC themselves who suggested including the data archive server. And then as the data transfer process wore on, IIDC actually chose to prioritize curating the data archive server above all other aspects of the data, above all other aspects of the Sloan Digital Sky Survey materials. So the data archive server initially started off in the eyes of the Sloan Digital Sky Survey as not being important at all. IIDC persuaded them to let them curate it, and then IIDC decided then to make it the focus, the main focus of their efforts. This, because it was a flat file format, it really enhanced the potential really enhanced the reuse potential of the Sloan Digital Sky Survey dataset for reproducibility. But why did Red University Library, why did the IIDC actually take on the work of curating the data archive server, and why did they choose to prioritize the data archive server? The first is because of the strategic objectives of the IIDC. So the IIDC was very, very keen, as I said, to really get research money. They needed to get research money just to keep themselves going. And they really saw the Sloan Digital Sky Survey data transfer process as something that actually reinforced their other major project, this guardianship of data project. They believed that actually they could use the Sloan Digital Sky Survey dataset essentially as a test case, and also to showcase the guardianship of data infrastructure, so that they could then make the case for more funding of the guardianship of data project, more funding for that project. So it really served their strategic objectives of really, promoting themselves as a research and development institute and getting more research funding. It also aligned very well with the mission, values, and internal culture of the IIDC. So as I mentioned, the IIDC had a very strong R&D mission, and their internal culture was really very much about pushing the cutting edge of research. And they felt that the data archive server really was very, very challenging. They actually developed new techniques, new curation techniques to be able to transfer the files from the Sloan Digital Sky Survey infrastructure server to their own data infrastructure. So for them, the data archive server was a great opportunity. It aligned really well with their mission, values, and internal culture. Also, as well, as I mentioned, the IIDC at Red University, they made the choice to really focus their make as their priority curating the data archive server. And the very flexible, agile organizational structure at IIDC allowed them to change their priorities so that they really could focus on the data archive server. And finally, as well, the staff within IIDC were very skilled software engineers. There were people who had a lot of experience with building digital data infrastructure. And as a result, curating the data archive server actually allowed them to use their existing staff expertise and also use the existing infrastructure that they'd built for the guardianship of data project. So, you know, their existing infrastructure gave them an easy win. And so just to sort of conclude these sort of comparisons between the red library and the blue library, like I said, the two libraries really, on the surface, it looked like they had a very similar task. It was to archive the Sloan Digital Sky Survey data and then to make that data available to astronomers. But ultimately what happened was that they took very different paths. And the reason they ended up taking these very different paths is due to these multiple factors that existed in each place, at each library. The strategic objectives of each library were distinct. The mission, values, and internal culture of each library was very distinct. They contrasted. Blue Library had a very service-oriented mission, whereas the IIDC at Red Library had a very research and development mission. The organizational structure was very different as well. At Blue University Library, they were very restrained by a rigid hierarchy, whereas Red University Library, within the IIDC, they had a very flexible organizational structure. And then as well, each university library made the choices in order to play to their existing strengths. So Blue University Library had existing strengths in special collections and the history of science, whereas Red University Library had existing strengths in software engineering. Of course, it's not just that they took different paths, but as well, each university library ended up being able to support very different groups of users of data sets. So, you know, what's clear here is that curating data isn't just, you know, a straightforward task. It's not something, there's not like one single solution to data curation, but instead there can be many different solutions. So for example, in the case of Blue University Library, taking on the administrative archive meant that historians and sociologists who study scientific collaboration, they're able to look at the papers of the Sloan Digital Sky Survey to be able to understand the processes of how you build a large scientific collaboration. Whereas Red University Library, by archiving the data archive server, they enabled greater reproducibility of Sloan Digital Sky Survey based research. And as well, so that really means that you know, the two libraries ended up supporting different scholarly purposes, and as well supporting different scholarly communities too. And so what this really means is that you know, I think the implications for the future of data curation at libraries is that the future of services provided by libraries that involve digital curation of research data sets will probably involve a range of library infrastructures. These infrastructures will differ in how they make data sets available and to who. They don't provide a straightforward solution to a data set producer's long-term curation needs. But instead, libraries with different approaches may actually complement each other well. That actually diversity of libraries services, on the one hand, it does pose many challenges, as we saw with the Sloan Digital Sky Survey curation, but as well, it could also be a source of value. It could really ensure that or enhance the use and reuse of research data sets in new and unexpected ways. So that's really one set of comparisons. I know that I'm kind of pushed a little bit for time, so I'll talk a bit more quickly through the next set of comparisons, and maybe as well sort of during the question and answer section as well, you might ask if you want more details about this. But as I mentioned earlier on, if we take the libraries, or the two libraries, as a single group, and we compare their perspectives on the transfer to the Sloan Digital Sky Survey leaders' perspectives on the transfer, they had very different reflections. The library stakeholders really believed that the transfer was a success, whereas the Sloan Digital Sky Survey leaders had very mixed perspectives. Some considered it a success, but some were very disappointed with the process. They felt that the data transfer didn't really meet their expectations or their needs. And in particular, you can read more in this paper. There was this difference between the expectations before the process began, and then the reality of actually what happened. So the librarians, they expected the process, as I said earlier, both libraries wanted to use the process as an opportunity to really build data curation infrastructure that they could then use more generally, right? So both Blue University Library and Red University Library really wanted to use the Sloan Digital Sky Survey dataset curation as a learning opportunity. They wanted to develop new expertise, new methods, new practices, and new systems that they could then go off and offer services to a much wider range of researchers, a much wider range of data sets across a wide range of scientific disciplines. And from their point of view, the Sloan Digital Sky Survey data transfer was a very valuable learning experience. So they were very satisfied. Whereas the Sloan Digital Sky Survey stakeholders were, they were more mixed, as I said. Before they started the data transfer process, they had very high expectations of the libraries. They really believed the libraries already had a lot of existing expertise in terms of curation of different types of research objects. They believed that the libraries would find it pretty easy then to translate their existing skills to curating the data sets. And they believed that the libraries would be able to build data curation infrastructure with very little cost on the part of the Sloan Digital Sky Survey. That was what they thought before the process. After the process, they had mixed feelings. On the one hand, they were pleased actually with the administrative archive being curated. And they were also impressed with the attitude of the librarians. But at the same time, they got frustrated with the process. They felt that the curation was much slower than they expected, that actually the libraries didn't complete all the tasks that they expected them to complete. And also as well, that the support services weren't sufficiently tailored to the needs of the users of the Sloan data sets. They felt that the that the services were kind of too generic. They were too general. There are a number of factors that contributed to this divergence. One is that, the libraries, really, they saw the primary legacy of the Sloan transfer as being the data curation infrastructure that they would build, that they could then go on and offer to other libraries. They saw the Sloan dataset as more incidental, whereas the Sloan Digital Sky Survey, they saw the curation and accessibility of their own dataset as the primary legacy. So these two groups of stakeholders had very different strategic motivations for taking part in the process. As well, there was insufficient communication between the librarians and the Sloan Digital Sky Survey stakeholders. There was a lot of communication at first, but then the communication really tailed off after 2008. And that's really when the libraries went and did their own thing. And that meant actually, you know, the people at the Sloan Digital Sky Survey, they thought that as soon as they handed the data set over to the libraries, that would be it. They didn't need to worry. Whereas actually they probably should have stayed in closer contact with the libraries. And as well, there are a number of mismatches between the Sloan and the two libraries as well. So the Sloan Digital Sky Survey had a very hierarchical structure, whereas we've already seen that Red University Library had a very flat, flexible structure. So whereas the Sloan Digital Sky Survey didn't expect Red University Library to change their priorities over time, Red University Library did change their priorities over time. And then there were mismatches between the Sloan Digital Sky Survey and the Blue University Library. You know, the Sloan Digital Sky Survey staff had a lot of very high scientific and technical expertise, whereas the Blue University Library staff had more of a traditional expertise in librarianship and collection management. And it meant that the two groups of people had a hard time understanding each other. And these different factors in turn gave rise to multiple differences in perspective. I'm not sure how I'm doing for time, so
I think it's fine. You can just go on.
Okay, sure. Okay. So I won't go through all of these four perspectives. But you can see that there are contrasts between the Sloan perspective on the one hand and the library perspective on the other hand. These differences in perspectives arose in multiple scenarios, multiple occasions, and they affected both libraries as well. In some cases, the differences in perspectives were resolved, usually as a result of intensive communication between the Sloan Digital Sky Survey and the libraries. And in other cases, the differences in perspectives were unresolved, in part, again, because of insufficient lack of communication. So I'm going to focus in particular on one or two of these differences in perspectives. One is whether the data set is a live research object or whether it's an artifact of research that should be preserved. So what this means is that from the Sloan Digital Sky Survey perspective, they always saw the data set as being an object that should be used for research. And their objective with the data transfer process was to have a data set that could be accessed by other researchers to be used for research. Whereas the libraries, on the other hand, initially, they really thought that the data set itself was something that was to be preserved. They didn't really see the data set as something that needed to be accessed by researchers. So to see this tension, or to see this difference in perspective, I mentioned that very early on, that the Sloan Digital Sky Survey leaders and the library leaders negotiated with each other. They signed a document that set out what this data transfer process would involve. And initially, the Sloan Digital Sky Survey users used the term archiving. That's what they said. They said what they wanted as a result of this process was the archiving of the data set. The library staff, when they saw the word archiving, they basically assumed that it meant preservation of the data set only. They didn't realize that actually the Sloan Digital Sky Survey leaders meant preservation and access of the data set. And so during the negotiation of the Memorandum of Understanding, the document, the agreement between the Sloan Digital Sky Survey and the libraries, there was intensive and regular communication. And it became clear to the Sloan Digital Sky Survey leaders that the librarians had misunderstood. And as a result, they changed the wording in the Memorandum of Understanding to archiving and serving. And as a result, it meant that the library staff realized that the data set should be made available to researchers. As a result, the two sides on this particular issue, they converged, and there was no more tension. The reasons for this is that at first, there was mismatched mental models on the two sides at the beginning of the process. And this was shaped by the expectations and experiences of both sides. So the library staff, they were so used to curating faculty papers as artifacts of research that they weren't really thinking in terms of the data set as a live research object. They needed to be told that, that was really why they had that was why at the beginning they misunderstood. And as well, the Sloan Digital Sky Survey stakeholders, they expected that the library staff would be able to adapt their mindset easily. And as a result, the two sides had this kind of mismatched understanding. But it was resolved through intensive communication. As well, the Sloan Digital Sky Survey, one of their perspectives was that they expected that the services implemented by the library would be very tailored to support the users of the astronomy dataset. So very tailored to support astronomers, that the services will provide very specialist expertise. Whereas the libraries, on the other hand, they implemented very generic services that weren't specialist to support the dataset user. So Blue University Library decided to implement what was known as the help desk. The help desk was a service that anybody who wanted to use the data set could get in touch with the help desk, send a message to the help desk to request help. The Sloan Digital Sky Survey, they wanted help desk staff to be able to answer any questions directly, which would require a very high level of astronomy knowledge and expertise. However, the library staff, on the other hand, they instead set up the help desk to be something where if somebody got in touch with a query, if an astronomer got in touch, that the help desk staff would simply identify somebody within the Sloan Digital Sky Survey who could answer the question, and they would direct the dataset user to that person within the Sloan Digital Sky Survey. So the help desk staff themselves did not develop specialist astronomy expertise. And as a result, both the Sloan Digital Sky Survey and help desk users were dissatisfied with the help desk. So you have this kind of tension between, on the one hand, tailored services that were desired by the Sloan Digital Sky Survey, or a more generic service that Blue University Library actually implemented. We can see that there were these multiple underlying factors that drove or that gave rise to this tension. One is that Sloan and the library had very different strategic motivations. Sloan Digital Sky Survey stakeholders, because they were focused on the Sloan Digital Sky Survey data set and promoting reuse of that, they really wanted the best possible service that could really help users of the Sloan Digital Sky Survey dataset. Whereas the library, because their motivation was to develop infrastructure that they could then offer to other disciplines for other datasets, they simply wanted to develop a service that they could easily adapt to other datasets and other disciplines. So they built the help desk in that way, in a way that it would be easy then, that they could then easily, take that help desk and really just adapt it to other data sets, to a wide range of data sets. As well, there was insufficient communication between the Sloan Digital Sky Survey and Blue University Library. Blue University Library, they didn't have much money, and so they basically, when implementing the help desk, they had to adapt the existing help desk services that they already had in place for library users more generally, which meant the generic service was very much what they already had in place, and they didn't really have the money to train new staff or to provide a more specialized service. Finally, as well, there were these organizational mismatches. So again, whilst Sloan Digital Sky Survey leaders had a very technical scientific mindset, they didn't realize that Blue University Library staff didn't share their level of expertise or their technical mindset to really get to grips with and understand the data set. So again, just coming up to conclusions now, we've seen that there are these divergences between the libraries on the one hand and the Sloan Digital Sky Survey leaders on the other, that the libraries ultimately didn't really fulfill the expectations of the Sloan Digital Sky Survey leaders, and that there were multiple surface level issues, multiple surface level differences in perspective, that have these deep-rooted dimensions or these deep-rooted causes, including that the library and the dataset producers had different strategic motivations, that as well, the specific organization, culture, mission, and values of the library is different from the dataset producers, and therefore can give rise to tensions. And as well, that whilst there may have been a lot of communication between the initial planning stages, there wasn't much communication after the planning stage, after the dataset got handed over. And that lack of communication really meant that the two sides stayed, they started off with these differences and they never really converged. What this means really is that libraries need to manage data producers' expectations. Libraries need to be very, data set producers may come in with very high levels of expectations about exactly what libraries can do. They may have, they may expect that libraries will find it easy to curate data sets in ways that make them very reusable, that they may expect that libraries are able to provide services to dataset reusers that are very specialist and very tailored to those datasets. But at the same time, actually, libraries need to be very clear with data producers that actually, libraries maybe are managing a wide variety of different datasets, that they can't provide real specialist curation services for each different discipline or each different dataset. That instead, that they are providing, multidisciplinary services. And so they need to carefully manage data producers' expectations up front at the planning stages, as well as throughout all stages of curation. And as well, what we can see and what we can learn from these, the comparison of the two libraries as well, is that complementary or hybrid approaches to curation may be beneficial, approaches that really bring together the strengths of both Blue Library in, for instance, collection management and traditional strengths of librarianship, with the strengths, the more technical and scientific strengths of Red University Library, along with the emphasis on service. And so that's kind of the conclusions of the second part, or the second paper. And I just want to thank the people who participated in our research, the Sloan Foundation, other members of the Centre for Knowledge Infrastructures, and to thank you all for listening.
Thank you, Professor Dutch, for this insightful sharing of what you have been doing in your research. May I check any questions from the audience? You may type in the chat box or turn on your mic to give some questions and comments. Before we start questions from the audience, may I first ask a question? Because there are the two universities have very different culture and hierarchy and structure. How the librarians and the library meet the expectations from the administrator of the university and the strategic plan of the university. So sometimes, as you mentioned, there are lacks between the communication. So how can we have a better communication, or how we can meet the others' expectation in the universities or the research field?
Yeah, that's a really interesting question, because obviously I've been focusing on how they meet the expectations of the dataset producers. So again, the university libraries, I think, are in a very difficult situation. So Blue University Library, for instance, they were trying to respond to the expectations of the university administrators. They had this mandate that they had to curate university faculty members' papers. And as well, they were in this position where the university administrators were putting a lot of budgetary pressure on the libraries. So I'm not sure if the situation is the same in China or not, but certainly within the United States and within the United Kingdom, where I'm from, university libraries have faced a lot of budgetary pressures, particularly in the wake of the financial crisis in 2008. Since then, with cutbacks in public spending, but also as well, libraries have been seen as less visible on campus, because people don't have to physically go to the library building to access library services. So very often when faculty access journals online, they don't realize it's the library providing those services, for instance. So to actually meet the needs of administrators, they do have to make the case for their usefulness. And so actually this is actually, I think, what motivated them to take part in this process, in this transfer process. And I think really as well, there's got to be a big emphasis on metrics, really being able to track to demonstrate compliance. So for example, in the US, the National Science Foundation, if you have funding from one project, if you then want to get funding for the next project, the researcher has to show how they've complied with data management planning from their previous project. So certainly, I think there's the possibility that libraries can say, well, they've allowed researchers to get this funding because they've helped researchers comply with the data management policies. There's also things like downloads, making sure that research data sets are cited appropriately when they get used in publications. So, I mean, yes, if somebody accesses a research data set from your university repository, that actually then that you actually tell them how to cite it, so you can then track how many citations your data sets are getting. Because I think metrics are very much sort of the language that university administrators understand. So it's really looking for opportunities to find metrics as well. And making and really as well reaching out, being proactive in reaching out to faculty on campus to promote your services, so that then those faculty are aware of the services. Very often I think faculty are not aware of the services that libraries provide, and so again, making them more aware to promote the uptake of services and to ensure that those faculty can act as advocates for the library.
Yeah, that's very important. That we may need metrics. We may need to proactive to meet professors and faculty members from the university. While I would like to address another questions that you mentioned, that the help desk issue, which is very close to our universities in Hong Kong, I'm sure. Because the service is not to such a data sets on astronomy. Our librarians are not as an expertise on the issue, but the libraries are most likely to be on the multidisciplinary approach. Well, how can we as librarian, which have not wide knowledge and deep knowledge as the scholars, how can we meet the expectations from the scholars, from the universities, or also from other parts of the world which send in inquiries?
Yeah, I mean, that's a really great question as well. I think one of it is, I talked about communication, and I think very often the researchers who produce the data sets, they think that when they deposit their data set in the repository, that's it. That's the end of their, they've done everything they need to do. And then they can sort of forget about the data set and move on. And I think what's going to be really important is maintaining the relationship with the data set producer, so that if somebody comes to the library and asks for help with interpreting the data set, that you actually have the relationship with the data set producer, that you can contact the data set producer, and that involves as well, I mean, I know this is the problem. There's always extra work. There's always, there's never an easy solution, but making sure, for instance, that if the dataset producer leaves the university and moves to a different university, that you can sort of follow, where they are, and also as well communicating up front at the beginning of the process with the dataset producer, that they retain responsibility for the data set. That you as the library are doing the work of archiving it and curating it, but at the same time, they may need to do some more work on it at a later date. They may need to answer questions on it from a reuser, and I think that's that's again, I think the culture is shifting. I think researchers are becoming more aware of that, but again, it's still something that I think needs to be communicated up front to researchers.
I see that.
Hi.
Yeah.
Hi. Yeah, so sorry, I can't turn on my camera right now, but so hi Wendy, hi Lily. So
Hi.
I am a data champion. I have been recruited by Wendy and Lily to promote research data management in our university here in Chinese University of Hong Kong. So I just wanted to follow up on the question just now, on the issue just now. So if we had a discussion yesterday on how philosophically, holistically, whether researchers nowadays, whether they be in the industry or in academia, they should be, um, how much should they be expected to know RDM? So push comes to shove, we have a very challenging task in front of us. Um, who should we rely on? Should we rely on ourselves to really understand the issue better? Oh, I didn't understand, therefore I should have taken more RDM
Mhm.
courses. Or should there have been a specialist like, say, Wendy or yourself or myself to delegate all these issues? Um, because right now it's becoming very what's the word I'm looking for? It's becoming very obvious that having RDM awareness is important, but then we can't expect everyone to become experts, especially when they have so much time to spend already on their specialty. So what are your thoughts on this?
Yeah, I mean, that's a really interesting question. And again, I don't think there's not a simple answer. I think it's I mean, I think education is very important. Certainly I know in many disciplines, um, as part of undergraduate degrees, or master's degrees, and doctoral degrees, students are required or having to undertake courses, for example, in open science. And so I think that's going to be very important, making them aware of, getting it embedded at a very early stage, but also as well. But I mean, it's a question with many, I think, sorry, I'll start again. It's going to require many different, it's going to require progress on many different areas or many different fronts. So yeah, certainly getting education from kind of the earliest stages of degrees, so that people really feel that, so it becomes second nature. But it also has to be easy for the researchers. So I think tools, kind of lightweight tools that researchers can use. So things that really help the researchers as well. So things potentially like electronic laboratory notebooks. Because, I think when you talk to researchers about research data management, their big, as you said yourself, their big issue is, well, they don't want to have to do a lot of extra work. And as well, just is also going to require changes in policies as well. So it's going to require, for instance, journals. More journals now are requiring evidence that data sets have been deposited and made publicly available with publication. I think universities as well are going to have to require researchers to do that as well. So I think it's going to be a lot of different. There's a lot of different answers, and a lot of different things need to be done at many different levels. And I think progress will be slow and gradual, but hopefully we'll get there.
All right. I think that's a very positive outlook to the situation. So thank you. Thank you for that.
Thanks for your question.
May I ask a question? Peter, you mentioned that the hybrid complementary approaches to curation may be beneficial. So in reality, at the end, the blue library and the red library, do they collaborate with each other in this project?
No, they didn't really. They didn't really communicate with each other. So again, the reasons for that, I think, are many, and due to things like due to institutional and organizational reasons. So no, they didn't. It was just more that because the Sloan had engaged two libraries, that they ended up with these two different outcomes. But I think, yeah, I think it's more a question of sort of seeing how people being very aware of the differences between, I think libraries perhaps being more aware of the differences between curating data and curating other objects, that it's not just a question of translating existing infrastructure. But again, this is also a challenge that needs to be addressed outside of the libraries. There needs to be more investment from universities or the government in infrastructure. It's not, one of the reasons that these libraries struggled is because they didn't have much money and because they had to use their existing infrastructure. And as a result, the existing infrastructure constrained them, placed constraints on them in terms of what they could actually do. So I think again, it's one of those things that, there needs to be sort of policy level decisions backed up by money, which is always more money would always be nice for everything. Nice.
Yeah, because the research data services, SDHK, is also a young service. So this is a very your talk is very inspiring talk, because we will also face this kind of scenario soon. So we were thinking then how to avoid, because as the librarian, we will at least I would do either automatically think about a blue or red universities thinking fall into that. But then it seems to me that is the researchers' perspective and librarians' perspective as different. So how we can jump out of the box to understand the researchers' needs is very important.
Yeah, right. It is. And it does require, I think, a serious investment of resources, which is always difficult to get.
Yeah, that's true.
And if there are no more questions, as we are also running out of time, it's almost 11 in Hong Kong and 10 p.m. at Illinois. I think we should end our session here. Thank you very much for Professor Peter Dutch for your sharing of your research, which is very insightful to our how we librarians as well as scholars from our university should approach each other in the value and the impact of research data management on the research, and how the infrastructure the university as well as the library should provide. Thank you very much for this. And thanks also for all the audience in coming to this session. This is the penultimate session, a penultimate event of our Research Data Management Week. We still have our last event tomorrow afternoon, which is called the Data Analytics Practice Opportunity Presentation Session. We also open this session to all members from the CUHK as well as from other universities too. So please feel free to join our session online or in person at our Digital Scholarship Lab tomorrow. The link for registration for the Zoom session is in the chat box. Please have a look at it and sign up for a Zoom link. So this is the end. Thank you very much for all of your participations, and thanks very much to Professor Peter Dutch. Hope we can have future sharing in the future. Thank you.
Let's give a great applause to Professor Peter Dutch. Thank you very much.
For having me.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
And thank you for your participation. Bye-bye.